In the remote mountains of Pakistan, where time seems to have stopped and the modern world barely dares to arrive, there is a village that is home to one of the most intriguing communities on the planet. A place where the rules that dominate the rest of the country simply don't apply. Here, ancient rituals include sacrifices, pregnant women are isolated for months, and wife swapping is culturally accepted. In these isolated valleys, they proudly resist external pressures, including attempts by the Taliban to convert them and erase their centuries-old culture. Today, Bello Mundo takes you to meet the Kalash, a people who defy everything you know and refuse to surrender. Between giant mountains and endless deserts, Pakistan has a history full of twists and turns and a cultural diversity that many people have no idea about. Created in 1947 after separating from India, this nation emerged as a home for the region's Muslims. But this division brought not only new beginnings, but also conflicts and wounds that are still part of the country's daily life today. Over time, Pakistan found itself at the center of global tensions. During the war in Afghanistan in the 80s, something began to change there. It was at this time that the Taliban emerged and spread its extreme ideas, causing instability that affected entire communities, especially those that followed different paths. And that's where a little-known but fascinating story comes in. The Kalash people. Living between Afghanistan and Pakistan, they maintain pagan traditions that make them a constant target of persecution and are called infidels in their own land. Number 1. History. Thousands of years ago, the region we now call Afghanistan was part of a land called Bactria, a place full of history and culture. This territory was shaped by peoples who came from afar, from the vast plains of Central Asia and Russia, traveling with their families, animals, and traditions in search of new lands. These peoples, known as Indo-Aryans or simply Aryans, had a name of their own choosing, meaning the nobles. It's likely that you've heard this word in a very different and darker context. It was appropriated and distorted by one Adolf during Nazi Germany, a period that brought immeasurable suffering to the world. But back to our story. These Aryans brought with them a language and a culture that became the basis of several civilizations. From this rich heritage came Hinduism, for example, one of the world's oldest religions, and Sanskrit, an ancient language that is still used in religious rituals in India today. In Afghanistan, this connection with the ancient Aryans is still perceived among peoples such as the Pashtuns and Tajiks, who share historical roots with these ancient nomads. But among all the groups that carry traces of this history, one stands out as a true living gem: the Kalash. With a population of just 4,000 people, they live isolated in mountain valleys on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. These valleys, known as Kafiristan, or Land of the Infidels, got their name from the neighboring peoples, who saw them as different because they didn't hold the same religious beliefs. While the world around them changed, the Kalash remained faithful to their traditions, preserving a culture and way of life that connects them directly to the past. Number 2. Origin and religion. The origin of this people has always generated curiosity and interesting theories. During the 19th and 20th centuries, European scholars were intrigued by the physical characteristics of many of them: fair skin, blue or green eyes, and blonde hair, and came up with theories that they could be descendants of Alexander the Great's soldiers, who passed through the region during his campaigns in India. Over time, these theories were discarded. Today, it is known that the Kalash are part of the great Indo-Aryan family that migrated to this region thousands of years ago. But what really makes this people unique is not just their distinctive appearance, but their religion. which managed to survive almost intact while the world around them changed radically. Many scholars classify the belief of the Kalash as proto-Hinduism or archaeo-Hinduism, due to the similarities with ancient Hinduism. And to understand the connection, it's worth remembering here that Hinduism is one of the world's oldest religions, which originated in India, and is marked by the worship of various gods, as well as concepts such as karma and the cycle of reincarnation, and still influences billions of people today. Curiously, the Kalash religion also shares traits with Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Persia, which had a completely different vision. While Hinduism believes in multiple deities, Zoroastrianism follows a single god, Ahura Mazda, and sees the world as an eternal battle between good and evil. In addition, many describe the spirituality of the Kalash as animistic, since they have a strong connection with nature and believe that spirits inhabit the world around them. In other words, it's a mixture of everything and more, so it doesn't have just one definition. It's unique in every way. Number 3. Traditions and beliefs. The Kalash live in a world where gods and spirits are deeply interwoven into everyday life. Among their most important deities is Mahandeo, considered the supreme god, a central figure who represents power and spiritual leadership. Another prominent name is Imra, revered as the creator of all things, although in some stories he is compared to the god of death in Hinduism. Among the heroes of mythology is Baliman, a warrior figure who is deeply respected, especially for his connection with horses, which are considered sacred. In addition to the great gods, spirituality values deities linked to the home and everyday life. Gestak, for example, is the goddess of the home, family, and marriage. Dizalik is the protector of women and children, associated with childbirth, the fireplace, and life force. They also believe in mountain spirits, described in their legends as mysterious fairy-like figures. To honor these entities, shrines and altars have been scattered throughout the valleys, where they perform rituals with offerings and sacrifices, which we'll talk about in a moment. But first, let's talk about the occasions on which these rituals are practiced. Number 4. Festivals. Throughout the year, these people celebrate 3 important festivals, none of which coincide with the commemorative dates of the rest of Pakistan. Each one is deeply connected to the seasons and the cycle of nature, reflecting their spiritual bond with the environment. In spring, Chilam Joshi takes place, a celebration that marks the beginning of the harvest. It's a moment of renewal and gratitude, since agriculture is the main source of sustenance for the community. When summer arrives, it's time for Uchal, a festival that pays homage to nature's generosity. Boys and girls gather in groups to dance and celebrate the season's healthy harvests. Winter brings the biggest and most eagerly awaited of all, Chalmos, an event full of dances and rituals performed as a form of prayer for a safe season. The harsh cold of the season makes the festival even more significant, symbolizing the unity and resilience of the community. These events are true spectacles of color, with vibrant costumes and traditional dances that transform the valleys into stages of celebration. Among the customs that attract attention is the consumption of homemade wine, a cultural practice that defies the norms of Pakistan, where the consumption of alcohol is prohibited by law. For this community, however, wine is not just a drink, it is considered sacred. Associated with the god Inder, wine carries ritualistic significance. Inder is said to have a vineyard in a sacred valley where there is an altar in his honor. This mythical vineyard is seen as a symbol of abundance and resistance, defended against invaders in the stories of the community. Number 5. Rituals. Now that the festivals have been introduced, it's time to talk about the rituals that accompany them. The ceremonies performed by the community include sacrifices of goats and sheep, which are offered to the gods and ancestors. These rituals, performed on altars scattered throughout the territory of Kafiristan, have a striking feature. Their square or rectangular structure adorned with effigies of horses at the ends, because for them the horse is sacred. Goat sacrifices in particular have a special meaning. They are performed as a form of protection against female contamination and demonic possession, according to their beliefs. However, there is a strict rule that separates women from these practices. They are not allowed to attend the sacrifices, consume the meat of the sacrificed animals, enter the shrines, or even go to the stables and pastures. But apart from these restrictions, there's not much they won't do. Number 6. Kalash women. The women of this community live with a mix of unique traditions and freedom that defies Pakistan's standards. Despite certain restrictions, such as the ban on attending sacrifices or entering shrines, Kalash women have more freedom compared to Muslims in the country. They don't wear veils and take on much of the work in the agricultural fields, while the men look after the animals. One of the most intriguing aspects of their lives is the Bashali, a space reserved for women during menstruation, pregnancy, or childbirth. During these periods, they are isolated, following a tradition that reflects both spirituality and practicality. Families provide food, but visits are not allowed until the end of the cycle or after the baby is born. Number 7. Marriage, divorce, and female power. Another thing that stands out when it comes to women. While Pakistan is often associated with conservative and restrictive practices, the Kalash follow a completely opposite path. Here, women play central roles in the community and enjoy an autonomy that is impressive. Even though marriages are usually arranged in childhood, the bride has complete freedom to refuse and choose her own destiny. A particularly curious tradition is the elopement of love, where they can marry whoever they want, even if the person is not part of the community. In addition, dancing and singing publicly at festivals and weddings is common practice, something practically unthinkable for women in other regions of the country. This freedom doesn't stop there. Although many past generations were illiterate, there was constant encouragement for women to study. Today, it is common to find them working as teachers, doctors, and nurses, broadening their horizons beyond domestic life. In marriage, women have more than a voice. They have a choice. If the marriage doesn't make them happy, they can run away, negotiate a divorce with their husband, and even look for a new partner. A curious detail is the practice of writing to the future groom, offering their hand and specifying how much was paid for the previous dowry. Is it incredible or not? Number 8. Challenges and attacks. The Kalash have always been a close-knit community, but their history is full of challenges and threats. Before the 1980s, when reaching the valley was a complicated task, they lived at constant risk of attacks from neighboring tribes, especially the powerful Ayun tribe from Chitral. The problem? Their traditions, producing and consuming wine, dancing freely, and even their ideas about infidelity were a slap in the face to the surrounding Muslim tribes, who saw these practices as an absolute disrespect to their beliefs. This created a dangerous climate of hostility. There were murders, kidnappings of women and children, and enormous pressure for the Kalash to abandon their culture. Many families eventually gave in, with some converting to Islam and others leaving the valley to try to live a normal life in the big cities. The decades of the 1960s and 70s were especially hard for the Kalash. the population decreased dramatically, and the community was on the verge of extinction. In desperation, many parents decided to marry off their daughters to Muslim men from cities like Karachi in an attempt to protect them from being kidnapped or even killed. Imagine the weight of abandoning your traditions and everything that defines your identity just to survive. But the difficulties didn't just come from the neighboring tribes. The Taliban, with its extremist ideology, has become another constant threat to the Kalash, putting even more pressure on an already fragile community. And you may be wondering, what does an extremist group from Afghanistan have to do with Pakistani territory? Unfortunately, in this story, borders don't mean protection. Number 9. Taliban. During the Afghan War, while the Afghan rebels were fighting the Soviets and their allies in the Kabul government, the Taliban began to expand its actions. Crossing borders, it reached Pakistan and began incursions against the Kalash villages, generating cycles of violence and death in the 1980s and 90s. With the American intervention in Afghanistan, the situation temporarily improved. A more stabilized government, coupled with the support of U.S. troops, brought a period of relative peace. However, everything changed in 2021, when the withdrawal of American troops led to the collapse of the Afghan government and the return of the extremist regime to power. The last few years have brought episodes of growing tension, such as the one that took place in September 2023. In the early hours of the morning, armed men were seen coming down from the mountains, quickly spreading out across the valley. More than 200 fighters hid behind trees and rocks, causing panic. Residents were forced to flee or hide. The security forces reacted by sending in troops, military vehicles, drones, and helicopters, resulting in 2 days of intense confrontation. 5 officers and at least 20 militants lost their lives. Attacks like this have become more frequent. News involving these extremists is not uncommon. Despite previous warnings about a possible offensive, the episode took residents by surprise, leaving the community in a state of constant tension. The authorities believe that the aim, in addition to retaliating against the Kalash culture, was to take control of the valley, a region of strategic importance. It is ironic that the Taliban, known for claiming to follow the laws of the Quran, disregards principles such as there is no compulsion in religion, because according to Islamic teachings, no one should be forced to adopt the Islamic religion or any other faith. In other words, this passage emphasizes that belief should be a voluntary choice based on conviction and not imposed by coercion, violence, or pressure. Meanwhile, the Kalash continue to resist, even under the constant threats and violence that undermine their traditions and way of life. And that concludes our adventure for today. Tell us in the comments, did you already know about this unique community? What else caught your attention or surprised you about them? If you enjoyed learning more about this fascinating reality and want to continue exploring stories as remarkable as this one, don't forget to follow the channel, leave your like, and activate notifications so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Thank you for following us to the end. We'll see you in the next episode of our journey through our Bello Mundo. See you soon.